Welcome back, everybody, to the Growing Band Director podcast. This is episode number 90. We're entitling this Servant Leadership with Alan Feirer. Alan, I haven't checked out that title with you. Is that an okay title to use?
I think it's a great title. Yeah.
Okay,
Well, we
great.
might talk about more than that, but that should draw people in because that's what it's all about.
So I first met you just when I discovered Music Ed Insights,
hmm
your podcast. So can you tell us a little bit about how you and Steve started that and what that's all about?
Yeah, during COVID, Steve did some really cool stuff as director of the Cedar Rapids Municipal Band. As they live streamed their outdoor concerts, he would hold these outdoor interviews, and he was so good at interviewing people. And he's always been a really good conversationalist. I've known him for decades. But we were having a conversation, and I said, "Dude, you should do a podcast." And he confessed that that was something he'd always been a bit interested in. He liked the idea of interviewing. And as we kept talking, we thought, let's go into this together so that you have a foil and let's be really thoughtful about it. And so, yeah, we're a little over 2 years in now, 30 some episodes, some great guests, including yourself, and the listenership keeps growing. And so we're pretty proud of it. Music Ed Insights.
What's the mission of the show?
We talk to national thought leaders in music education who provide insights for classroom K-12 educators to use. So it is broad in terms of general vocal and instrumental, although we do have specialists on, but we work really hard to make sure that there are takeaways for as many teachers as possible K-12.
That's awesome. You're right. When you get too specific, it narrows out certain people. So yeah, that's great. Also, your company, Group Dynamic, is that a company you started?
Yeah, I did start that about 25 years ago when I started to learn a lot more about leadership and what I was doing wrong. I think we're going to get into that. But I started that in 1998 as kind of a summer gig while I was a band director. And I wanted to talk about leadership and effective working together as much as possible to as many people as possible in the summers while I was teaching. And then in 2010, it went full time, and it had been geared toward youth or youth serving organizations, like church youth group type stuff or that kind of infrastructure or
Mm-hmm.
schools. And then because I had taken a lot of the content that I had been using for the previous 10 years from, corporate leadership thought, I then put out the shingle to serve any group. So in those first couple of years, I think it was 1/3 youth or youth serving to 2/3 businesses. And now it's actually about 85% businesses and 15% youth in terms of my division of time, but still got my hands in the music education world through the podcast, through youth
Mm-hmm.
leadership workshops, some other honor bands and stuff like that.
So does your company go in and help people with leadership if they request so?
Here's what I'd love to tell your listeners because everybody will totally understand. Sometimes I will say to a business owner, uh, or president or manager or whatever, I'll say, I'm going to come help you have a better band program, even though you're not really a band director. And I remember one of my first pitches, so to speak, to a grocery store director who said, "What does a former band director know about how I run this grocery store?" And I said, "Well, I spent almost 20 years helping volunteer, hormonally hopped up teenagers get on the same page and work really hard to achieve an objective." And she said, "Huh, that is kind of what I do here day to day." Because a lot of the employees are minors, and it's true that once we understand how to do great things with volunteers who could walk at any time,
Mm-hmm.
to get them to wear costumes with feathers and do things that are very spitty and involve Saturdays, that I'm speaking very specifically of high
Mm-hmm.
school band teaching.
Yeah.
It's not a huge leap to then talk about leadership best practices for people who are paid to be somewhere.
That's great. So I'm curious, and your website is, if they just Google Group Dynamic, they can find it. I've been doing some perusing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
So how did you make that leap? What was the genesis of you were a band director, now you have your own leadership business? How did that happen?
Something that always motivated me, like since I was a kid and I was involved in activities, were turnarounds. Even like quick turnarounds or slow, deliberate turnarounds. I loved that. So my third job, I deliberately took a job. I deliberately sought a job and interviewed for several jobs where the program wasn't doing well, but there were resources there. One of them finally hired me. And then that turnaround process began. So by any measure of success, whether it's enrollment or ratings or the spirit with which students enter the room, that program wasn't doing very well. And we turned it around. And I say we because it was me and the students, the community, the band boosters, and the
Hmm.
administration, right, and the other staff. We turned that around, particularly in like years 3 through 8. And then once I hit years 8 and 9, I got a little restless.
Hmm.
And I thought the things that I enjoyed most about this program building are kind of done. The idea of like maintaining or sustaining at a high level wasn't that interesting. And I didn't want to necessarily start over. I thought it would be fun to take the summer job. And at that time, I was probably working with, I don't know, like 600 or 700 students a summer, a
Hmm.
few different school districts, just taking that full time and working in a lot of different environments. There were a couple other things that happened in my last 2 or 3 years of teaching. Some stress related health issues, um, random comments out of the blue from from friends or other band directors saying things like, "Huh, this stuff would be really good where my spouse works." Um,
Hmm.
have you ever thought that maybe you were meant to do this full time? Like, there's just a lot of little conversations, a little clues that started to make it feel like the calling was to do something else.
That's great. And you
And it
said that
happened
was
in 2010. Yeah, it was in
2010.
2010. Mhm.
Um, so you were alluding a little bit to the stages of programs. I mentioned, I think of some of my colleagues who are good at going in and turning around a program, but then when they get there for a number of years, they decide to go somewhere else and turn another program around. So maybe they should call you. Um, but it definitely made me think because I think there's a deeper thing to this. When we're students, we're constantly growing, and then we become college students, and then we're growing, and then we get our first band job, and that program has to grow, and then at some point, whether it's that program or your second program or your third program, you hit a point where it continues to grow. But I remember one year my band was playing at an all eastern, and then the next year we were worse, and the next year after that we were a little bit worse. And that sort of sparked something in me like, how do I continue to get better and help my program get better and improve, even though what I'm working with day to day is going down a little bit? So I know what that struggle feels like, and it's definitely a different deal than the building. Because you're right, at some point you feel like you kind of get there, even though you don't. Right, you're always
Right,
building
right.
and growing,
Yep.
but you feel like,
Yeah.
okay, this program has arrived and we're doing X, Y, and Z. But then at some point, there's like this long lasting portion of it that is definitely different. And I know you're not the only one to, that like the opening part of that better than the second part.
Yeah, but we also know people who would rather not do that building part. They would love to
Hmm.
walk in the room and the students can play whatever literature they put in front of them. I mean, not necessarily grade 6, but like it's they're already kind of at that level that they want, and so then it becomes a process of the creativity of, hey, what should we do this year for marching band? What should we program this year for concert band? What tweaks should we make? And then if one year is, it's like an A plus year, and then the next year is maybe a B plus year, and the year after
Hmm.
that's an A minus year, like that's okay. Maybe you got a B or B minus year in there every once in a while, but by and large, it's sort of that year that you enjoy. I think there's people who enjoy and appreciate that as well, and I think that the directors who have been at that school since I've been there have kind of fit that mold, and then there's also the drive to like, well, we're pretty good. What aspect could we make even better?
Hmm.
And sometimes those are minor tweaks. Sometimes those are little things. And I I like big things. I like the drama.
Hmm.
I like the, wow, 2 years ago we couldn't have played this, and this year we can.
You mentioned, I'm just going to say it. I doubt you were a lousy band director, but you said you were a lousy band director, and that's what got you into that. What made you say that?
First of all, I just think it speaks to like your personal level of like grace and kindness and empathy and giving and believing the best in others that you even off air before we started, you mentioned your discomfort in using that term. And I appreciate that about you. I think it's one of the reasons that you have such a following, probably as a human being and as a teacher in your own
Thank you.
area, but also definitely online, which is really cool to watch. So I appreciate that. I describe myself as somebody who was a lousy band director back when I started. I accidentally did a few things okay because I got to know the students and they got to know me and started to accept me and all my faults. But I really was the opposite of how to be effective. Both your podcast and our podcast recently had some episodes where we just talked about what makes for a successful program or what makes it a teacher successful.
Hmm.
And in so many words, it just comes back down to you show respect, you're careful, you're kind, you have high standards, but you treat people well and meet people where they're at and take them along the way. The yelling, the dictating, the my way or the highway just absolutely doesn't work. Anybody who's successful knows that. And yet, for some reason, I was just very my way or the highway. I was
Hmm.
skilled at picking out good literature. I had a good ear. I could diagnose well. But when it came to getting people to do the right thing, I just had this chip on my shoulder of, hey, if you're here, you want to be good. So just do it. Just practice. Just listen to me. Just no, fix this now. Sit up straight. What are you doing? Why wouldn't you sit up straight? I mean, I would send a kid to the office for having bad posture. That was something I did in my second or third year of teaching. And I've been told by a member of that family who I'm friends with now that was dinner conversation, was that
Of
crazy
course.
Mr. Feirer
Oh.
who sent Dan to the office for having bad posture. They talked about that for a decade and a half after that. So I did some things that really left a mark that were like really, really, they just were unkind, and my motives were good. And I think that's important. Is
Yeah.
I actually cared about students, but I showed it extremely poorly by being kind of a dictatorial, role power using leader who believed I should be respected because of my expertise and they should work hard because it's a privilege to be here. Doggone it.
So I totally see where you're coming from now, because we've all, obviously we're all different, but people listening to this might not be teachers yet, or they might be in their first 5 years of teaching, or they might be further along in the journey. But you're right. I was a lousy band director too. And, I didn't do all of those things, but there was lots of things that I did wrong as well. And I think it's so important that we just continue to keep growing and learning from other people and accepting, and I'll say this: in Maine, we have a system. When you take to some festivals, it's a 1 to 4 system. And it was a jazz band festival, and I got a rating of a 4 on literature, which was the judge's very kind way of saying, you don't know what you're doing. You shouldn't be programming grade 6 with these kids. They can't play this at all. And looking back on that, I should have been mortified. Like, how did I put my kids in this position? But I just looked at that sheet and I said, they're right. Okay. And then that was sort of the message I needed to move along. Um,
Mhm.
so I guess I've been a lousy band director too. It's nice to, I guess it takes one to know one.
Yeah, but you picked up on the signals, right? Like eventually, and that's what happened for me. A lot of people got really blunt with me after a while. I had a colleague who kind of took it to me and said, "You walk around here like you're the king."
Hmm.
And people want to work with you. I think people want to work with you, but everyone around you always feels like they're auditioning for you. And I thought that was a really apt way of putting
Hmm.
that. The woman I'm married to now and have been for nearly 26 years, we were dating at the time, and I was kind of griping about this situation. And she said, "You're kind of different with your students than you are with me. With me, you're just like you, and you're awesome. But when you're with your students, it's like you have a chip on your shoulder, and you always have something to prove or demand. I'm glad you're not like that with me, or this might not be going anywhere." So between those two things and a couple of other folks in my life, I started to realize I was my own worst enemy. Enrollment was dropping because of me, not because of the students. Students were showing up at the last possible second and leaving as soon as they could
Hmm.
because of me, not because of their lack of dedication. I was right next door to an amazing choir program with all the same kids.
Hmm.
So it was super obvious that they were capable of excellence. And it was at that second job where I started to read, some really smart stuff. The first book I read and embraced was called The Leadership Challenge by James Kouzes and Barry Posner. And their research is solid. The 5 practices of exemplary leadership is where their research led, which are model the way, develop a clear vision, um, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. And there's a number of very specific behaviors that fall under those 5 practices. But I realized I wasn't creating a vision. I wasn't being a good role model. I was unkind and disrespectful on the podium. Challenging the process, I thought that I was, but that's all about figuring out like the right way to get things done rather than shoehorning the desired way of getting things done into a place where that won't necessarily happen. And enabling others to act and encouraging the heart, that's where I really fell down.
Hmm.
I remember giving a student a compliment in one of those early years, and someone else in the room said, "Wow, Mr. Feirer just gave you a compliment. That's pretty special because that's really rare." And at that moment, I found myself feeling really proud of that. And then also having it nag at me because it was at about that time. I'm like, this shouldn't elicit so much. Saying something nice should not elicit so much excitement from other people. Maybe it should be a little more normal around here.
A number of years ago, I heard a great quote that stuck with me from Dr. Tim, who I think everybody knows, and if you don't, you should check him
Oh,
out.
yeah.
Um, where he says the highest form of leadership is giving. It was from
Mm-hmm.
um, one of these camps in front of a high school, and it's on VHS. I had my old tech guy like put it on a DVD so we could use it and all that, and that was just amazing. That's going to lead us into some servant leadership and all that. But first, can we talk? You mentioned group dynamic 3-step process regarding leadership.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
Yeah, the group dynamic 3-step process to become an effective servant leader to your peers is build relationships, encourage others, then ask for more. The group dynamic servant leadership model has a 2-word action plan: meet needs. So it's not unlike what Dr. Tim talks about when the highest form of leadership is giving. Just use those 2 words to say your role is to figure out what is needed and then meet those needs. And I have like 8 virtues and 10 behaviors, and that's pretty tough to memorize. But what students can memorize is build relationships, encourage others, and ask for more. And that order matters. And the thing that I was screwing up in the first 6, 7 years of my teaching career is this simple. I was asking for more before they knew I was on their side,
Mm-hmm.
and before we actually had a relationship where we got to know each other. Something I mentioned earlier on was I was a lousy band director, but I accidentally did some things well. And what I meant by that was over time, people just got to know me and I got to know them. And then even though I was really clumsy in my efforts and in my technique, we still did okay. And it was
Mm-hmm.
because of those relationships. And even encouraging others, step 2, encourage others, even that can ring false or hollow if the relationship isn't built yet. So the order matters. We build relationships by getting to know people and letting them get to know us as well. It's a 2-way street. And then we encourage others. And that's not like false praise or toxic positivity or like unrealistic optimism. It's letting people know, hey, I'm on your side. So it can be great horn angle, awesome work today. Or it can be, hey, everybody has a hard time with the horn angle. We all have bad days. We'll keep practicing. It's going to be okay. I'm with you. I got faith in you. You're going to be able to match those stick heights. Not today, but someday you
We're
will.
not there
Just
yet. Yeah.
right. So like whether it's like positive affirmation or it's like, hey, I can see you're not doing well, but don't worry, we'll get there. Like that's the encouragement that lets people know, okay, he wants what's best for me. And then that 3rd step, ask for more. Once I know that we know each other, and so it's legit when you encourage me, it's not just fake, and what you're supposed to be doing, then I'm ready to have you ask for more from me. And that's the 3-step process.
It's also there's those band directors who walk the walk, and then the others that don't. There
Hmm.
was a director from many decades ago that I knew about that this marching band program would go, and this director had many other staff members. You know, like a lot of us have staff members on our staff, things like that. But the marching band would be rehearsing, and this band director would be sitting off to the side in a lawn chair, sitting and
Hmm.
sort of barking instructions.
Yeah.
And you could tell on the field the whole dynamic was not where it should have been. Whereas, I've had some years where, and I'm not trying to point to me, I just found this came to my mind. I have some years where we may have a prop that needs to be built and it didn't get done when we thought it was going to get done, and something came up and it was like, all right, I'm the last line of defense, so here I am with my hammer and my saw and my tape measure and all that, and I'm spending the time doing it. But when kids see that you're building the prop, or that you're taking the trash out, or that you're doing all the other things, and
Yep.
then you ask them to do it too, then all of a sudden they love to do it. When they see you putting away music, they know that it's okay and it's cool for them to put away music too.
Yeah.
And I think that that kind of leads to the culture, right? That helps build that culture and the trust that you're talking about.
100%. In the first half of my career, when I knew everything, those kids can unload the trailer. I've got higher end things to worry about. I got to find a good place to warm up. I got to maybe sell a reed, or whatever. Like, I don't have time to unload that trailer. That's menial work. Those were not the best years. In the last half of my career, I would take, I don't know, probably 10 to 15 minutes the very first time during the whole year that we would have to unload the trailer. I'd be the first on, I'd be carrying 4 or 5 instruments at a time. Students would be coming in to help me out. And it was literally the only time I unloaded the trailer all year long.
Mm-hmm.
Because all you got to do is do it one time so they know you're not above it. And then they start to realize, he shouldn't be unloading that trailer. He should be going and finding a place for us to warm up. You get
Mm-hmm.
out of here, Mr. Feirer. We got this. But that's what you want. You want to flip that on its head, because you talk about walking the walk. If we're going to tell our students their job as a servant leader is to meet needs, then you better show that you're not above any work at all, because you're going to ask them to do an awful lot of work as well.
The word service just keeps coming up to me. You talk about being a servant leader, and so many times in our culture, we want to be served rather than serving other people.
Mm-hmm.
I was always taught that if you can make money doing something you love and helping people, those are from my parents, that you have a pretty good life there. And that whole serving other people, it's really addicting, isn't it? It's one of those things that once you get into it and do it, you want it more and more and more, and you want less for yourself, but you get so much more out of when you serve other people.
100%. And that even goes back to Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, back in he wrote that one in the 50s. Just that the basic human motive is to find purpose. And when we're serving others, when we're doing things to make the world a better place through our interactions with others, it's either addicting or it's fulfilling, or it feels weird when you go too long without doing it. I think you're right. I think you're so right about that.
And there was another thing that Dr. Tim said. He was talking about good leaders don't have time to take the credit. They don't care about the
Right.
credit. I think he said they're mission oriented. It's like,
Hmm.
I don't care about that credit. This trailer has to be unloaded in 9 minutes because then we need to do this, this, and this. And
Right.
again, that's infectious.
Yeah. Yeah. You give away the credit and then you take the blame.
Yep.
And that was a Dr. Timism. What I used to take my kids to Dr. Tim so they would listen to him and then be better. And then I took my kids to Dr. Tim and realized I got to pay attention to this so that I can be better.
Yep.
And then I just took my kids to Dr. Tim, and then I just took notes on like how Dr. Tim did everything. So I had this notebook that had this evolution of like first his content and then his techniques. Like I would time how long he would do things that were funny until he did something serious. Like I kind of analyzed all that. And that was a part of how I ended up doing what I did for a living at first during just those summers. Is if you want to say that I copied or emulated Dr. Tim, I did to a certain extent when I first started out. And that's like a basketball player wanting to do things like Michael Jordan, or a tennis
Mm-hmm.
player wanting to do things, like Steffi Graf. I mean, you copy what works. And then I evolved my own style, but that guy's a genius. And I talked to him once as I was starting to like do these workshops in the summers, like after the 90s into the early 2000s. I said, hey, I just want you to know I'm kind of stealing a couple of your things. I feel like I should ask your permission. There's a couple of very specific things that there's a leadership quiz I no longer use, and the 4 levels of maturity, which I use all the time with all groups. And he just said, "Are you using it to build people?" Yeah, you can hear Dr. Tim saying that in a hotel lobby at a conference. He's like, "Are you doing it to build people?" And I said, "Yeah, but I'm going to make some money while I don't care about the money. I don't care about that. Make all the money you want, whatever. Are you using it to build people?" And I said, "Yes, I am." "Steal away, steal it all." And then he walked away and did something else. But can you see that? Can you picture Dr. Tim with that intensity in that moment?
Do you have a more of a relationship with him than that one moment? I have one moment. I'll share it, but I'm curious.
Oh,
As
I'd
someone who's
love
in
to
the
hear
same
your
field,
moment.
my moment was in the bathroom at Midwest. It was just
Go
one of
on.
those, I use the stall, and then,
Right.
I'm washing my hands, and I look up and I'm next to Dr. Tim washing my hands. And of course, he didn't know who I was, but of course, he probably figured I was a band director because, you're at Midwest. So I just looked up and I said, I just want to thank you for, all the lives you've changed and everything you've done for everybody, including myself. And I appreciate that. And he sat up and he looked at me and said, I could say the exact same thing for you. Like, here's
Yeah.
Dr. Tim, who didn't know me at all, but he knew I was a band director, and he
Mm-hmm.
he gave it away as well.
And if you're the kind of person who's saying that to him, he's right. He's got that figured out about you. So yeah, he's a very, very generous man. I every once in a while I'm like, does he get enough time for himself? Because he just does so much for so many people. He did write the foreword to my book, the Group Dynamic Field Guide, 51 Things Student Leaders Can Do Today. He wrote the foreword to that book. So yeah, we recognize each other when we see. We don't like chat on the phone or anything like that,
Mhm.
but yeah, he'll answer my emails.
So, I'm glad you mentioned that book. So you have two of them, right? Group Dynamic Field Guide, and then Group Dynamic Field Guide for Youth. Um, so tell us a little bit about that.
Um, I I have a blog that up until about a year and a half ago, I put out a post every Wednesday, and I realized there were hundreds of posts and tens of thousands of words, and I thought, doggone it, everybody's asked me to write a book. I don't think the world needs another book on leadership. And people kept saying, but people keep writing them and people keep buying them. So people love different ways of looking at things, and you look
Yeah.
at things a slightly different way. You're kind of punchy and practical, or some words that people use to describe like how I approached
Mm-hmm.
um, these writings, and even in my teaching about leadership. You're you're concise and you're practical, and that might be helpful. So I worked with a team that involved my spouse, Julie, because she's a writing genius. And then the person who was serving as my assistant at the time, Ashley. Actually, the two of them, I came up with like a format for the book. And then the two of them actually went through all of my writing and came up with a few ideas. And then I took it from there. And eventually we self published that book. And then I turned it into a youth version. So the youth version and the adult versions have, I believe, all the chapter titles are the same.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that's different are the examples that I use.
Sure.
So I might talk about, putting the trombone cases all the way away in the youth book, and I might talk about putting all the lab supplies back where they belong in the lab in the adult book. It's
Yeah.
literally, it's just so universal. It's also universal. But the way it's organized, it's almost like a leadership devotional
Okay.
because it has 50 readings and then like a reflection place. So here's
Design.
something that leaders can do to something I stole from Dr. Tim. Here's the 3 things activity that you could use to work on vision. And then I describe the activity. And then there's a question like rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. How often do you go through an exercise like this or whatever? And then what do you want to remember? And then there's like a reflection piece. So people can go through it like one reading a week and do it in a year, or they
Yeah.
could like pick a chapter that works for them. So that's how it's organized.
So I believe it says 51 ideas. Were you aiming for a full year and you came up one short, or how did that work?
No, it was 50, so there could be 5 for each of those 10 behaviors. Um, and then the gimmick is the 51st is you come up with one.
Oh.
And so it's just like two blank pages. So spoiler alert, when you get to the end of the book, it's got two blank pages and you have to work harder.
And you can buy it on Amazon. Look at that.
You can buy it on Amazon. The grown up version, the version that's geared toward corporate leaders, is being revised and will be reissued with a new title probably within the next year. So if you just search for my name on Amazon as an author, you'll find whatever version is current right now.
That's awesome. Again, I want to thank you for giving of your time so much. The more teachers I talk to with experience, they talk, it's more about giving and it's more about relationship to people. So thank you for
Yeah,
solidifying that in my
absolutely.
mind. I just wanted to end with
Absolutely.
a final question of a message you might have to band directors.
Right now, I think my message is not be a better leader.
Yeah.
It's it's forgive yourself if you feel like you're not doing the very best you can right now, because I think it is a challenging time to be a band director. And so, what I hope is that people are being very good to themselves um, as they go through their own journey. I think that times were a little bit more luxurious for me in the mid to late '90s when it came to some of these realizations.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had more prep time and more flexibility in my schedule and fewer requirements than I would have now if I were a band director in the same place. And so I was able to beat myself up for being lousy and then work on a self-improvement plan and put all these practices into play and see how they worked. Right now, be good to yourself and take care of yourself so that you can take care of others. And then once that's out of the way, the second part of the message is just take care of these students, figure out what they need and meet those needs, because you're one of the only people who gets to see them every semester
Mm-hmm.
for all 4 years. I'm talking to high school people, particularly if you're doing seventh and eighth grade, both. I mean, it depends on the structure of your program and the way things are organized. But they might have an amazing language arts teacher that they see twice their whole academic career. But you are with them and you're going to notice things that other people don't notice. And so do notice those things and see what they need and meet those needs for them. But put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others. We need you
Well
so
put.
much to
Well
keep
put.
taking care of these students.
For anybody who wants to reach out to you, what would be the best way to do that?
Alan at groupdynamic.net. And the
Beautiful.
website is groupdynamic.net. So, yep, I answer my emails, I answer my phone. I'm very easy to find online on
Thank you for
purpose.
spending the time with me today. Appreciate it.
Kyle, thanks for the service that you do. I am impressed with your work ethic and how many episodes you crank out frequently, and they're good. They're all good with really good people. So keep it up, and thanks for what you're doing for the profession. It's really special.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.